Welcome back to the show, Nutrition Connection, the show where science meets storytelling. I'm your host, Dr. Kristen Hicks-Roof, dietitian, researcher, and lifelong advocate of the role of nutrition, food, and health. Each episode, I sit down with dietitians and nutrition experts all across the food and healthcare landscape, leaders whose work touches nearly every aspect of our lives. So whether you're a student, a seasoned professional, or someone simply curious about food, nutrition, and health, this podcast is just for you. The views, thoughts, and comments on this podcast do not reflect those of my employer nor the employers of my guests. So let's go ahead and get connected. Today, I'm really excited to bring on a fairly recent connection. We have Dr. Cindy Goody. She's a business to science consultant. Welcome to the show, Cindy.
Hey, thanks, Kristen, for the opportunity.
So I can't wait to talk about your career. I know at one point you worked in a high-level position, and I'm not going to give away too many details, but I can't wait to explore your career in food, which is a lot of what you've done. So what got you interested in becoming a dietitian and nutrition professional in the first place?
When I think about how I entered this profession, it was because I was raised on a farm, and I learned how things came to life, whether it was pigs, corn, wheat, or soybeans, or even a fresh picked tomato. And I was just so fond about food and nutrition, and how you can take such a small seed and it just, through sunshine and fertilizer and rain, it would just grow. And I was a member of 4-H for a number of years and just really enjoy talking about once food is eaten, it becomes nutrition and the education therein.
I love that. So I'm in Phoenix. It is prime time for tomatoes. I have so many tomato plants growing right now that somehow the wind blew, I think, some of the flowers or seeds into my neighbor's yard. And there's these beautiful tomato plants growing in his yard. I'm like, can I please keep these? And he's being very gracious. But you're right. It's that nurturing and that growth. And I also think you pointed out a really good point about 4-H. It's something that we don't see a lot of dietitians who started in that. How did that impact your career to ultimately becoming a dietitian?
We think about, I really learned about the importance of leadership and project management and public speaking and finishing what you start is kind of just the tenets of living life and moving through one's career. So a lot of credence to my parents who were 4-H members long decades ago. And my brother and I were a part of that, and we loved it. It was extraordinary.
I wish there was more opportunities. I, grew up in a city metro area where 4-H was not a big thing. And I think it'd be so cool. We see so many people disconnected from agriculture now. So how do we bring agriculture in the classroom, right? And show what farmers and producers are doing and how you can be involved in agriculture. So let's talk about your journey. Okay. So you became a dietitian. Did you go straight to becoming a dietitian? And then what's your career path to now as a, business to science consultant?
Let me start by saying that I've had a career buffet. And so raised in Iowa educated, with many thanks to Iowa State University and the University of Iowa, including my dietetic internship at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. Not to be confused with Ohio, nor Idaho. It's IOWA. At any rate, those are all good places to visit as well. So, after my my formal education at those academic institutions, I decided that I want to have an opportunity to see the world. And I did that through the Peace Corps of 2.5 years of service in a rural Guatemalan village, shortly at the end of their civil war. And that meant providing a lot of education around hand washing, helping people make toothbrushes, as well as planting gardens to, eradicate nutrient deficiency diseases like kwashiorkor or marasmus or even xerophthalmia. And to be able to see that happening in person over the course of my time in there was magical.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. In a previous episode, we had on Dr. Lori Wright, who does a lot of work in Ghana, where they defined and, developed kwashiorkor, the definition. And to just have that connection, you're right. I think sometimes here in the US, we learn about it in school, maybe a textbook, but then to see it in real life and know that nutrition is that key integral player to a patient doing well and not doing well, right? So that's really cool that you were in the Peace Corps. I feel like if I were to relive a life, I would love to do that. I know I sent a number of students into Food Corps, which I thought that was really cool. That's a US version of the Peace Corps, and especially, focused on gardening and education. So if you've never heard of Food Corps and you're a young student, it's a great opportunity to get involved in domestic land. So, but what was your career like after that?
My life after that was then to go into clinical. Worked in bariatric surgery, weight loss, management programs in that space. And then I decided to earn a PhD in the social foundations of education, which really focused on it was a combination of sociology, anthropology, and economics, really focusing on how people make food choices for themselves as well as their families in the context of decision making. Went on to be an academician for a while, teaching undergraduate and graduate students, conducting clinical trials in type 2 diabetes. And then sometimes life just brings us other opportunities and you have to divert and become very creative. And this was at a time where I became a grocery store dietitian, and worked in programming at the community level. And thereafter that, life unfolded with the McDonald's Corporation.
I mean, you're right. You really have had a buffet of jobs, right? So talk to me about, some of my listeners are academics, they're PhDs or they're, nutrition experts. How was that transition out of academia, especially going into industry? Like, did you build the skill sets to have that foundation to be successful in industry? Did you build that in academia, or was that a on the job growth?
While I was in academia, I started taking business courses in marketing, consumer insights, data analytics, and and then just continued on when I was working in grocery retail. Earned an MBA, uh, and just fell in love with business. To be able to see things from start to finish and to see how you could just create something that could be monetized and would surprise and delight customers.
Well, I think that's something so powerful that dietitian and nutrition experts can do is this strategy. How do we take education and skills to implementation, to ROI, to, consumer satisfaction, to dollar value increase of the product? So what did you do in your roles? Maybe you can talk a little bit about your retail role. Like what were some of the tasks, and then talk about maybe some of your role within McDonald's and what did you do as part of those roles?
Let me start with my retail experience, which was in Hy-Vee, which is a
Yeah.
Midwest regional, well-known grocery store, and that is continuing to bloom and expand its borders and its presence. What I learned about at Hy-Vee is at that particular point, um, fun facts that most customers don't know what they're going to eat at 4 o'clock in the day, by 4 o'clock, what they're going to have for dinner. And so they're there and they want solutions like any person. Here's some recipes, here's some things that are easy to prepare, here's some grab and go things that you can combine and start in, in a crock pot situation. So it's providing that education that's easy to understand, and so that people feel comfortable about it, because when they're comfortable with something and understand it, they feel validated, quite honestly, is what I found out in that retail setting. And that quickly parlayed into, and applied to, work at McDonald's, where customers are looking for something. We're looking for something that was a little bit different, a little bit maybe fewer calories, maybe more oats, grains, fibers across the food. And then there's always that element of customer service. You're like, how do you best, uh, you know, develop a connection with a customer so that they will come back to see you again and seek more information? The second thing that I'd like to, recommend is that, really creating messages based on what's on the package, whether it's the nutrition facts panel, or whether there's maybe some claims that people are thinking about and wondering about, and really translating that into people, translating it to people so they can easily understand it. Because then when people understand something, such as, this is an excellent source of dietary fiber, and not going into the differences of insoluble and soluble fiber, because you're going to see people's eyes glaze over. You just want to focus on, what's in it for them, when it comes to dietary fiber, and talking about the benefits.
I mean, I think that's a really good example, and I think it's a challenge that many nutrition experts assume, right? We oftentimes assume that people know what a carbohydrate, protein, and fat are. We assume that people understand what fiber does in our body or what are sources of fiber. We assume that they know how much protein is in a meat versus a bean, right? And there's things that we assume that not all consumers are quite there in their nutrition knowledge. So I think you're right, you're trying to bridge this gap, which is so relevant to business to science consulting that you do now, which is, how do you merge the science to ultimately support the business? Because companies are there to make money. And I love Hy-Vee. So anytime I go back to Iowa, we always go to Hy-Vee for dinner, because they have the build your own Mongolian bar. And oh my God, it's so good. You get to put all the veggies and the meats and the eggs and make your sauces. One of my favorite meals there. So what about what do you do now? How is your role as a consultant, and what kind of activities do you do as a consultant?
What I'm doing now, consultant wise, is if organizations are looking for like an innovation strategy, a product innovation strategy, maybe they're looking for a nutrition strategy, like how to decrease or eliminate or renovate or innovate when it comes to artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives, and or decreasing the amount of calories through portion size with particular menu options that are being procured.
Well, and I think there's so much opportunity for nutrition experts to come in, especially right now where nutrition is high level, both politically, but also in a consumer's mind, right? So no matter of your political beliefs, people are more conscious and thinking about health than they ever were before. And so companies need to align to consumer demands, whether that is, artificial dyes or portion or what the makeup of nutrients are. So I do think you and many other dietitian and nutrition consultants have great opportunities to be a voice of nutrition, to be able to be a credible information provider to support that business transition. So how does scientific evidence and data fuel your day-to-day in what you do?
When I think about making substantiated claims and adhering to FDA regulations in that vein, those guardrails they're still rooted in the science. But not only do we have to look to the science from the past that's, currently informing us perhaps, but we also have to think about how the science is evolving and how it's impacting, for example, the gut microbiome or the brain. And, as we're thinking about startup companies who may not have regulatory functions therein, and that's ripe for teaching and educating those product developers before something goes to market. So it's about, here's what it says yesterday and today, and here's what's, evolving in this space, and to be mindful of how it might impact what people choose and what they choose to eat. And that's really, GLP-1 is a prime example of that, as the science evolves around its use and application to people, whether they have type 2 diabetes or weight management concerns. It's something to stay watching on.
When I think you gave such a good example, right, of GLP-1s. The science behind GLP-1s is we know people are eating less. They're maybe not thinking about food as much. They're changing what they're eating. And so then you have to have evolvement and change strategy and nutrition strategy as a food company or a food service operation to be able to meet the consumer's need, right? So it's science is informing not only what the consumers are looking for, but how do you then have more science to provide and create product and menu options to support those consumer demands. So you've had, I loved your example of a buffet of pathways of roles, because I think so many people that I've interviewed and had conversations with, they're all in the same boat. They were in retail. Everyone, served a bout of clinical. They may have done some media or private practice or food industry. And right, like you kind of have this dip your toes, which I think is really powerful for our profession, that we have so much autonomy and flexibility of where we can be. So because you've had a whole wealth of experience, what's your favorite, or what are you most proud of in your career so far?
I have a teenager now, and the teenager loves vegetables. I would say that that's my claim to fame.
It's like, that's not even job relevant, and I totally can feel that. I mean, we have 3 little girls, and to try and get them to eat some foods that I'm like, you can explain nutrition to the core, but it doesn't really matter, right? I remember I taught all my kids to eat broccoli, because I'd say there are trees and there's birds inside. So every time you bit the broccoli, the birds flew away. So every time they'd eat a bite of broccoli, I ducked like I was dodging these birds. But it really does. You're like, I'm proud that you eat those foods, and I'm proud that you have, so that's awesome. What about in your career? What are you most proud of? Which I know is more than just having your teenager eating vegetables.
Oh my gosh. You know what? I think that it's, it was the greatest accomplishment was making sure that I coached and mentored others as I climbed, and to share and care about others as part of my leadership.
I love that. And that is so critical for emerging nutrition professionals and experienced nutrition professionals. I don't think we're ever too old to mentor, guide, support. And really, I mean, that's one of the foundations of this podcast, creating connections, showing that you can be in whatever role that you want to be in, right? And you have mentors that can help guide you throughout those roles. So good on you for being a good mentor and continuing to do that. So what suggestions do you have for someone who's interested in a career path like yours? So maybe you could talk a little bit about, what was it like changing directions in the dietetics profession? And then what kind of tips would you also give someone who's maybe interested in doing the strategy and consulting behind the scenes?
It's an excellent question, Christian. Kristen, I would say that I went on this career buffet because I was always curious. Like, what's that going to taste like? What's the sensory experience going to be? There's just so many questions that I had. And I wanted to like enjoy all of them. And so I had to put together the time, money, and resources to be able to do that. And it was a juggling act. And it was like really, really enjoyable. I mean, I put myself through school, waiting tables and working a lot of nights. And I think that, that's what helped me, you know, really just box in and lock in and just focus on what needed to be done. And, start what you finish, finish what you start, excuse me. And I just went after it. I'm not trying to be coy here, but it's just like, there was just it was scary at times, let me tell you,
Right?
to step off of the academic track. And this is at a time not much different than what we're experiencing now, where research funding had dried up for clinical trials. And, having a conversation with someone from the NIH who advised me, I can say this now, and I thank that person, that they told me that I would have to wait close to 9 years before there would be any funding from the NIH on type 2 diabetes
Wow.
research and nutrition. And I had to like move. I moved away from the academic setting, restarted my career at Hy-Vee in business and industry. Not knowing how things work there. It was very, very different, 180 degrees. And I think, I was like, I didn't know where it was going to go. I just knew that I needed a job. And that's kind of where I am right now, candidly. I'm working at Nordstrom as a brand spokesperson.
I love
Talking
that. I
about
need to come to you. I have zero style. So we need to follow up on that. But I think you said something so powerful, Cindy. And you could keep going because it looked like you wanted to say more. I think that vulnerability and change is very scary. I remember when I was thinking about leaving my academic role, I had just gotten promotion and tenure. I mean, the accolade was, my dream of getting promotion and tenure was accomplished. And I realized I didn't feel any different. But I was also scared, like, could I go into another role? Like, I don't know anything about anything but academic life, And so, but I think one of the things that's so powerful is that we obtain skills, knowledge, and translatable science. That's what we know as dietitian and nutrition experts. And we can bring those skills and knowledge to a lot of different roles. So even though you may not be a perfect, okay, I check every box on this job description, you probably check more than you think you do. You just may not have experience in that particular role. Like you said, going from academia into retail, and even going from retail into, the food industry. Those are massive changes, right? So I think that it's really powerful, your story, in that you can change and you can move roles and still be successful. And I like your buffet because I think you learn something from every role, and every role plays an imprint on who you are, right? And what you're passionate about. And I think as long as we continue to follow that, we can be successful in whatever that means to us.
well stated. I'm a lifelong learner, and we have the skill set that we received probably in our second year of college. And it was around assess, plan, implement, and evaluate. Just, that's the key, and has been the key in my career to just like really simplify it right to those 4 tenets of taking care of patients or clients or customers.
Yeah, and there's so much synergy between that, whether you're in the clinical practice or you're in a food service operation or whatever role that you play. You're right. You have these foundational skills that we learn as nutrition professionals that can be translated across the different niches within the profession. Okay, so my favorite question that I always say for the end is, if you had a crystal ball, what do you, Cindy, think is coming next in nutrition?
um, hmm. Anyway, Generation Z is going to set the pace for that. And Generation Z is just sharing so much with us around flavors and their preferences and just being really progressive in their thinking. And, we've seen companies where it's cultivated protein. Where is that going to go? And I think they are going to show us how it can be done, just as an example.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in the sense that Gen Z, like I said, is more interested in nutrition and health than pretty much any generation before it. And so, will that ultimately pave the way for new products, new food service operations, new, roles for dietitians potentially led by this young generation? I mean, I even think back to my college days, which was a couple years ago, I'd say. But I look back and I'm like, we didn't have sports dietitians at our university. We didn't have, I mean, this was early social media. There were not influencers in those roles that you see now. And so I think there's so much opportunity that can be coming for our profession, but we need to listen, right? We need to listen. We need to read. We need to observe. We need to watch these TikTok trends because they're telling us something. They're telling us what they want of food products. One of my favorite food products or food brands, and I don't usually like list brands, but I love these popsicles called Good Pop. I have young kids and I just love the like transparency of it. Is it perfect? No, it's still a popsicle. But I love the transparency and the thought behind bringing nutrition at least integrated in their communication of the product, right? And I think that's what I see so much of Gen Z. They want that transparency. What nutrients are in the food? What claims are there? And is there actually science to back up the claims? Or are you just saying it? So are you seeing a lot of that too when you learn and read about Gen Zs?
Yes, they want the details, and there's this interesting phenomenon that I'm experiencing also as I read about Gen Z, is like leapfrogging the thing, leapfrogging their thinking around. Okay, yeah, we're glad that it has, it doesn't have any artificial colors in it or flavors, but we're interested now in our teeth and how do you add more calcium to that popsicle? And so they're not waiting for somebody at a food manufacturing company to develop that. I believe that it's from the outside in is going to influence those questions more bravely than, asking people. They're going to get to it faster than companies will of what they want.
Well, I mean, you even see it just in recipes, right? Like these influencers or everyday people can post a new recipe that they thought of that I'm like, dang, that's so smart. I'm surprised it hasn't been a manufactured product for my freezer. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy how fast things go from ideation to implementation in the social media versus how does the food industry or agriculture keep up with what these these products that they're asking for. So Cindy, what a good conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I hope you enjoyed listening to Cindy's story. So if you like the show, make sure you subscribe, follow, but most importantly, check out the next episode, because every episode I bring on a new dietitian and nutrition expert all across food and healthcare. So thanks again, Cindy.
Thank you.
Okay.